that are actual, have to do with laws. And then there's things called resolutions, which are sort of like a message from one government to another. So in this case, if this would have been introduced and passed, it would have been a message from the Montana legislature asking Congress to find alternatives to reservations. Well, this got out in the press and on social media, and people were understandably very upset. And so this Senator Regier backed off and never introduced it, thankfully, and no one else picked it up during the session. And not only that, but when confronted on this attempt to ask Congress to get rid of reservations, he actually threw one of his constituents under the bus and said this was not an idea of mine. This came from back home in my district. This group over there, I had nothing to do with it personally. And so this is the example of the kind of gutless and racist attempts by especially non-native legislators to undermine tribal sovereignty. And it's all based on this ignorance of the reality of indigenous peoples, the unique political, not racial status of indigenous peoples, and as a way of continuing the genocide of indigenous peoples. And so there are other things that were proposed related not just to hunting rights, but also water rights. Water compacts were debated in the legislative session, as well as proposals to fully fund certain public laws. And so, and here in the picture we have a member of the North Cheyenne tribe who were able to get up there. And then generally improving policies, and so our focus there was pushing back on harmful stereotypes of natives and tribal communities, and describing policy proposals. And so things that have to do not only with how natives are taught, but also supporting issues like greater broadband access, economic development. And so, for example, on page 4 of this scorecard, there is a bill that passed, House Bill 19, revising laws related to Indian affairs and economic development. And so that was a proposal that passed that would continue investment of state funds into economic development in the Indian country. And so, supporting programs like grants for native entrepreneurs that want to start a business or expand a business. There are grant opportunities for that as well. And so, looking at ways at how to increase economic development in the state side with tribal communities. And part of that is also this study and publication that the state is supposed to make that shows the economic impact of tribal communities and its people here in the state, which is not a known sort of numbers yet. States like Idaho have this information for their state, but Montana is all in the process, and this bill is part of that. And so some outcomes from the legislative session. So, like I mentioned before, bad voting rights bills were defeated. Some did pass. The ones that did pass have either are redundant or they already have they are already addressed in current statute or current laws, or they don't impact. Some of them don't impact Native communities specifically, or procedural changes that the details get in the weeds. The other thing that was protected was our independent judiciary. So in Montana, we of course have the district courts on the state level, and then the next step from there is the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court was targeted because one, it's nonpartisan, and two, because they generally block a lot of the bad things that goes on in the legislature. And so the majority party, again, I won't name names, is tired of the judiciary being the sort of stopgap, we would say, of the legislature. And so they were trying to add partisan requirements, like you had to, if you're running for Supreme Court, you would have had to put an R or an E next to your name to further politicize our government structure. And this is bad, not just because of how terrible partisan stuff is these days, both Republicans and Democrats, but also because it's bad because the judiciary is supposed to be independent from politics. It's supposed to be something that is impartial and blind to politics. And so the majority was also trying to reduce the size of the Supreme Court. And so, and in our state, because we don't have an appellate level or appeals level to our state courts, anything that is appealed that, say, from Cascade County, and somebody wants to appeal a decision from the state court, goes directly to our Supreme Court, our state Supreme Court. And so, from child custody cases to voting rights cases, to even, divorces, if they are, if any one of those parties appeals it, it goes straight to the Supreme Court. And so to have a Supreme Court that's impartial, especially with a large, as you can imagine, a large number of cases that they can see from the district courts, means that protecting that was a top priority, and we're able to do that along with members like you and partner organizations. And then the last bit here is about our state constitution. So I mentioned before our state constitution. For those of you who don't know, there's two main things that I like to point out about our state constitution. And it doesn't have to do with the right to privacy, but our equal respect and understanding. The first one has to do, of course, with Title 10, which is Indian education for all. Now, it's not perfect. I mentioned earlier that there was a bill that passed this last session trying to reform and create reporting requirements for school districts to make that program better. The other thing that's in our state constitution is this idea of a right to dignity. Now, there are things like bills